Breaking news. The inner workings of Putin's campaign to alter Russian history in support of the Ukrainian conflict. This week, graduating Russian high school students will return to classrooms to find history rewritten in Putin's likeness. Kremlin propaganda justifying the war in Ukraine is reflected in a new textbook that was produced in just 4 months and is being heralded as the first state effort to unify teaching of the subject since the Soviet era. Students in their senior year of high school will use the book, which will be used by history teachers all over the country and even in Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. They will learn that the conflict was started by a ultranationalist neighbor and backed by the West, and that the Kremlin's special military operation is uniting society against them. There is no mention of civilian casualties or accusations of war crimes, but Russian soldiers are portrayed as heroes. All of this is consistent with the country's history, which tends to paint its darkest periods in a more sympathetic light. NBC News talked to current and former Russian history teachers about the pressure they've felt to conform their lessons to Kremlin narratives. Discontent with the new textbook has been voiced by some. Tamara Eidelman, 64, has taught history for 40 years in Moscow and now runs a popular history channel on YouTube. From the teaching perspective, it's very primitive and boring, she said. Ideologically speaking, it's pure poison, she declared. Literal brainwashing. The educational system is not immune to the Kremlin's efforts to weaponize history and cultivate national pride in order to rally the public in support of the invasion. At the start of each week, schools must play the national anthem and raise the flag, and there are plans to teach more basic military training, possibly with the help of returning soldiers. Starting the school year off with an hour of weekly state-mandated, patriotic education called Talks About Important Things is another wartime innovation. On Friday, Putin held a virtual meeting with students, telling them that Russia was as invincible now as it had been during World War II. The textbook, which was made available to NBC News, can now be purchased online. According to Eidelman, the 36 chapters preceding the section on the war in Ukraine serve as a very strategic build-up to it. They praise the Soviet Union. Even when Stalin was in power, Putin has rehabilitated Stalin's image as a brutal dictator, and portray its fall as a great tragedy. She went on to say that the Russian leader is portrayed as a hero who rebuilt his country after it was destroyed and is now forced to defend it from the same enemies that toppled the USSR. The invasion of Russia prompted Eidelman to flee to Portugal, where he has since spoken out about how the country's propaganda that hits you in the nose influences children. In the chapter dedicated to the conflict in Ukraine, the Kremlin's justification for attacking its neighbor, that it faced the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO and a wider conflict, is restated. The textbook predicts that it would possibly be the end of civilization. It was impossible to permit. It reiterates the existence of Ukrainian neo-Nazism while accusing the West of starting the war and trying to economically destroy Russia. In addition, the chapter includes brief biographies of Russian soldiers who have either participated in battle or lost their lives doing so. Students are warned not to trust anything they read online about the situation in Ukraine because they could be manipulated by a global industry of fakes. This is completely unrelated to past events. An anonymous former history professor said, "It's hardcore propaganda, Soviet-era style." The professor's family was still in Russia at the time, so he was afraid for their safety. After reading the textbook, he was in shock, because the tone is so similar to Putin's speeches. It's not just an attempt by the Kremlin to influence young minds, but pure indoctrination of the young generation, the teacher, who left Russia late last year and now teaches abroad, said. It's how they're trying to create a devoted Putin fandom.